Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's fantastic to see a large number of you joining us online for today's session on financing food systems recovery, scaling up research and innovation, which we're very excited to be jointly convening with our friends at CGIAR. My name is Natasha Hayward, and I'm the program head for the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, or GAFSP. And as I said, it's fantastic to have you with us this morning, particularly at a time when, as some of you may have followed yesterday, the SOFI report, the State of Food Insecurity and Nutrition Insecurity in the World, was released by FAO and our Rome-based partners, highlighting how hunger and severe food insecurity over the past year has really worsened, amplified by the COVID pandemic. And so today we really have an opportunity to hear from and focus on two important institutions, each playing a critical role at a time when food security remains a pressing global challenge. We hope to hear more about the work of CGIAR and GAFSP on the ground, and also on the perspectives of partners to our two programs. And I should note that we're also offering this session against the backdrop of GAFSP's new call for proposals now in 2021, where we have invited submissions for grant financing from country governments and also from producer organization-led proposals. And so we're very excited to see the interest and demand in our call, and we hope that this conversation will be a useful contribution to your planning in that effort. A few notes on how we're going to organize ourselves today. We have about 90 minutes for the overall session. We are recording this webinar for your information, and we will be making it available afterwards for those of you that are interested or have to step away or would like your colleagues to see it. We are making simultaneous interpretation available in French and English. So those of you familiar with Zoom hopefully will know that there's a little button down on the right that would allow you to choose the appropriate channel. As it is a webinar, those of us who are pre-identified to speak will have the ability to intervene in that way. But for those of you who are watching, please know that you have the chat function on the side. And so if you do have any questions that you would like to address to any of our speakers, that is the tool to use. So please be aware that there is the chat function, and do introduce yourself and note any questions there. We're going to have three opening speakers who I'll introduce shortly and who will help us set the scene for this discussion. And after their opening remarks, we will turn to an active panel discussion, which I'll have the pleasure to moderate. And where we hope to hear from those who are active both at the country and regional level and working in the agriculture and food space. After that panel discussion, we'll reserve some time to address your questions from the chat. So we'll have a live Q&A where the panelists can respond directly to a selection of your questions. And finally, we'll wrap up with concluding remarks from one of the contributing donors to both of our programs, CGIAR and GAFSP, and that will be one of our colleagues from Norway. So I hope that gives you the lay of the land of what to expect. I see that we have over 100 participants joining us now, and we would be thrilled for those of you that are able to stay for the whole time period. Without further ado, let me invite our first opening speaker, Jürgen Vögele, who is both the chair of the CGIAR System Council and also the Vice President for Sustainable Development at the World Bank, which is a key organization for both the platforms serving as a critical host. So Jürgen, let me turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks a lot, Natasha, and a very warm welcome to all of you on the call. I'm really delighted that we have over 100 participants in this important meeting. So, I mean, I've been involved in both the CGIAR and the GAFSP for a long time, and they were both set up to really focus on supporting smallholder farmers, particularly in poor areas. So they have a lot in common, even though they have a different approach or a different footprint, one focusing on the research, the other one focusing on funding and providing finance and in a targeted way to really ramp up and scale up the kind of interventions that are necessary. Both CGIAR and GAPS work collaboratively, and they recognize that partnerships are absolutely critical for success. For those of you who don't know, the CGIAR literally has thousands of individual partnerships across its centers and institutions. I recall a couple of years ago, we did a review of the International Rice Research Institute in Los Baños in the Philippines, and found that over 900 partnerships were active for that center alone at the time. So we're looking at thousands of partnerships at the global level, at the regional level, also very important. There's regional issues in different parts of the world. And of course, locally, very, very important. We do need a coordinated and a science-based approach to tackling food insecurity, not only in the COVID-19 recovery, but also to achieve the collectively agreed sustainable development goals. And both institutions have a major role to contribute to these. And we need partnerships that enable to harness knowledge from different actors, collaborate on designing innovative solutions, and work together to deliver these interventions to those who need them the most, as I said earlier. The partnerships are really at the core of all of this. In the CGIAR, we have presence in more than 70 countries through our work with policymakers in government and international agencies, research collaborators, scientific academic institutions around the world, public and private sector companies, and NGOs involved in developing and scaling innovations. And as I said, between the CGIAR and the GAPS, there's a real reinforcement of each other's mandates and missions by encouraging dialogue at country level between these research centers, national governments, and all the actors in the space. These partnerships are crucial for success. None of the institutions can do this work alone. And of course, investment that the GAPS provides is absolutely essential to make the research, to make sure that the research that the CGIAR produces actually gets implemented on the ground. As Natasha said, the COVID pandemic has caused a global health crisis and massive disruptions to economies and livelihoods, threatening to reverse the hard-won poverty alleviation gains that we've all collectively made over the past decades. We unfortunately are seeing, and Natasha, you mentioned the launch of the SOFI, we are unfortunately seeing a near doubling of the number of food insecure people in just the last 15 months to about 270 million in just a little over a year, basically, which is absolutely unacceptable and shocking. And we need to redouble our efforts to do whatever we can, both on the CGIAR and GAPS and in other institutions, to really ramp up our support to the folks who are absolutely in a terrible situation right now. Now, the other crisis, and maybe you have some time in the discussion to go a little deeper here as well. The reality is that our current food system is profoundly unsustainable, with very high cost to human health, to the environment, and the major contribution to climate change. This is not necessary, and it really is actually an area that is now getting more and more into focus. We certainly at the World Bank make this a major focus of our climate work. We saw it discussed at the G7 and G20, and I think it will play a critical role in the COP conversation, COP26 conversation coming up in Glasgow. We did an analysis not long ago about the cost, the hidden cost, the indirect cost of the food system, and unfortunately, the conclusion was that the current global food system produces value of around $10 trillion a year, but it actually creates costs in the order of $12 trillion a year. When you take all the health costs, half the world's population is some way, one way or another, malnourished. If you take the environmental impact of producing the food, and if you take the climate impact, between 25 and 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions come out of the food system. If you add all this up, even conservatively estimated, the food system is actually a net loss proposition globally. And that absolutely must change and can change. We cannot deal with climate change, and we cannot deal with our global health crisis without fundamentally redoing and rethinking the global food system. And both CGIAR and GAPS have a key role to play. So I'm really delighted that we have this event, that the two are working together. And with the one CGIAR that is in the process of being finalized, I think we now have two structures and two organizations that are absolutely ready to collaborate in a big and meaningful way. We will hear some of the examples of what's already happening on the ground. So this is wonderful, and I just hope that as a result of this webinar, Natasha, that we can deepen, strengthen, and further expand this collaboration. With that, I wish everyone good success of the 90-minute webinar, and back to you, Natasha.
Many thanks, Jürgen. And it's great to have you remind us of the original focus of both instruments on smallholders, but then also to really underscore the present day challenges, right, in terms of where our food systems are at, and the need for a really strong focus on sustainability. And I'm mindful of also, of course, this conversation is taking place in the run-up to the pre-summit of the UN Food Systems Summit, which will take place in September, and I think which we as partners hope will be a pivotal moment in bringing together different actors to try and address some of those challenges that you refer to. Let me turn now to our next opening speaker. We have two additional colleagues, both of whom are very familiar with both CGIAR and GAFS. First of all, I'm going to invite Dr. Kundavi Kadaresan, who is a Managing Director for Global Engagement and Innovation at CGIAR. And over to you, Kundavi, for your additional remarks to set the scene. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natasha, and thank you, Jürgen. It's great to join everybody here. You know, a number of CGIAR colleagues, partners at GAFS, several government officials, development partner community, civil society at such a critical moment for food systems in the face of this ongoing pandemic and the challenge of fostering a fair and just global recovery. And Jürgen really underlined the importance of partnership, and that's something that I also wanted to really stress upon here today. Every country worldwide is experiencing to various degrees the ongoing ripple effects of the pandemic. The immediate impact of the virus for many was a global health emergency. Imagine costing almost 4 million lives and still counting. But the wider consequences, the loss of jobs and livelihood, with more than 100 million slipping below the poverty line. And the recent FAO report that was released largely in terms of people going hungry. That is also a huge concern. Yet the ripples stretch the furthest, last the longest, and reoccur with greatest impact in low-income countries. And the pandemic is exacerbating the inequities suffered by those already living at the edge of existence. And that's what you see in many of these recent major reports that are coming out now. As of April, less than 2% of the African population was vaccinated. Now, holding back the pandemic recovery and undoing many of the gains that we made in recent years towards food and economic security. For those now living on less than $4 a day, meeting the basic needs, including a diverse and nutritious diet, it is simply out of reach. And this puts an additional 6.7 million children at risk of wasting. Now, as many high-income countries are enjoying the economic recovery slowly, with 90% expected to regain their pre-pandemic GDP by 2022, cases of COVID-19 continue to rise in many low-income countries. And the ongoing health crisis and the subsequent impact on the agriculture sector raises serious concerns now about food inflation. Now, with prices already 27% more expensive than between 2014 and 2016. One of the CGIAR studies found more than 90% of the households in Nairobi slums were eating a limited diet because of the pandemic. The pandemic, as we all know, is also exposing the weak links in the food system supply chain. When subjected to this unexpected pressure of labor and movement restrictions, but at the same time, the increased demand, the demand side is going up. However, staple crop production, for example, remained relatively stable, yet the market for high-value fruits and vegetables and food retail in urban areas was impacted by lockdown and travel restrictions. In each case, in the CGR's International Food Policy Research Institute has provided a vital data and insights through country analysis, forecasts, and ongoing commentary to help guide national responses. So those evidence-based work has really helped us all. To streamline this effort, CGR worked very quickly and to establish in July 2020 a COVID-19 hub that brought this research and provided evidence on innovation and tools that can support both short-term and long-term, and with respect to advancing the COVID-19 action plans. And you will hear more of it in the panel discussion. CGR also developed a model for country-based, country-level interventions that started with identifying the weaknesses in food systems and working towards a pathway for greater resilience. We began with Bangladesh and Ethiopia, and now expanded to Myanmar, Nigeria, and Malawi, supporting our national partners to address their specific and diverse context as well. Now, accurate and relevant research, we all know, is the basis of solid policy making, and that capitalizes on innovation for both emergency response and long-term resilient building. And that's where, for instance, in Bangladesh, the CGR researchers and partners are developing a food systems monitoring dashboard that includes a digital disease monitor and hotspot locator. It actually looks at with the modules on crop, fish, and livestock disease. And in Ethiopia, CGR is working with the government to develop messages on consumption, food safety, water, sanitation, and hygiene to provide the scientific evidence and deter misinformation. And this is the kind of concrete evidence-based work that is really helping us advance in having good impact as well. In a sense, we are at a crucial moment in the middle of efforts coordinated by the COVID-19 hub to support national partners and have an ambitious program of work for the second half of 2021 and beyond. But short-term recovery must be based on long-term goals, including repairing value chain, adopting One Health approaches, and building food systems resilience. But we must ensure we have the means as well as the methods to deliver the food systems recovery. And that's why mainstreaming and scaling innovation for systems recovery also means mainstreaming and scaling investment into agriculture research. That's also the hard part of it, getting investment in the area of research. Ongoing investments and partnerships such as CGR GACS are essential to fully realize the benefits of resilient and sustainable food systems. A recent UNESCO report found that overall investment into science was increasing pre-pandemic, but only 0.2% of research actually addressed the needs of smallholder farmers. Jürgen talked about smallholder farmers, but look at the contribution it is making, the research with respect to the issues of smallholder farmers. So a lot of work needs to be done there. The good thing is that with G7 leaders recently committing to a G7 Compact for Research and Collaboration, the world's biggest economies are realizing the importance of sharing the fruits of science, technology, innovation more widely. So with more investment, channeled strategically, science can feed not only the world, it can feed hope for a better future. I'm very glad to be here and thank you. And I hand this back now to Natasha.
Thank you so much, Kandavi, for those remarks. I think we really appreciate you flagging how some of the effects that we're seeing now could well endure. And so we need to be thinking and planning now, not just for the short term, but also the long term in our responses and trying to factor in the inequities that are at play in doing so. Fantastic. Let me now turn to our last introductory speaker. I'm very pleased to be joined by Mr. Dirk Schatzschneider. Dirk is very well known to GAFSP as the chair of our steering committee. And he is also, of course, the Assistant Director General for Food and Rural Development at Germany's Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, known to many of you as BMZ. Dirk, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natasha, very much. Glad to be here again, talk to a lot of colleagues and good friends. Thank you as well, Kundavi, for sharing with us CGIAR's experience with the COVID-19 hub and illustrating the relevance of scientific evidence and innovation for resilient recovery of food systems from the pandemic. That was very impressive and enlightening for me. Now, with the pressing need to end hunger globally and to do so sustainably and within planetary boundaries, we are delighted to work closely with both GAFS and CGIAR as they advance their missions to support farmers and strengthen sustainable and innovative agricultural production and food security globally. Germany has long been a strong supporter of both GAFS and CGIAR, as you all know, and especially now as chair of the GAFS steering committee and as a member of the CGIAR council, we have definitely to mention that BMZ is a long-standing big fan of the CGIAR in its endeavor to provide scalable innovations to improve the resilience of food and agriculture systems worldwide. With the current reform process in its final stage, we expect CGIAR to become a major multilateral player for innovative solutions, also with strong linkages to national and local partners to meet their demand. The CGIAR Research Strategy 2030 and the designing of the new research initiatives, and Jürgen Vögele was mentioning that, they must take into account these aspects and consider challenges that arise under the current COVID-19 pandemic situation. Furthermore, new and innovative ways to finance agricultural research and innovations are needed for successful implementation. What is more, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us the need of a stronger alignment and coordinated response of all development partners. BMZ therefore explicitly welcomes the partnership between GAFS and CGIAR. CGIAR and GAFS should reinforce each other's mandate and mission. In the current context of scarce financing and high needs, CGIAR and GAFS collaboration in project countries is a type of partnership that we need to make a difference and to work more effectively as a global community. Jointly, we strengthen smallholder farmers. This was already mentioned. We combat hunger and establish resilient agriculture through innovative research. Personally, me as the chair of GAFS, I particularly value the program as a financing instrument that includes smallholder farmer representatives on its governing board, making decisions by consensus alongside donors, country representatives, and development agencies. GAFS projects are designed and led by governments, the private sector, and producer organizations who put forward project proposals for financing after going through thorough national consultative processes to align with the country's long-term agricultural strategies. It is there at country level where GAFS and CGIAR meet and could create a lot of synergies. Both initiatives serve to promote a national dialogue and deploy their forces to adapt and scale up initiatives or potential solutions that work in each context. Today at this webinar, we will hear examples about how research and innovation is making a difference to address smallholder livelihood and household food security, while also building resilient agricultural and food systems. With the global pandemic in full force, GAFS, with an immediate reaction, supported its partner countries and producer organizations in their recovery efforts. And GAFS' new call for proposals, Natasha mentioned it at the introduction, is now, since May this year, aiming at mid and long-term recovery efforts. This new call, launched 2 months ago, will support governments and producer organizations in their transition from more immediate recovery and humanitarian interventions into implementing much needed longer term investments to address impacts and build resilience to future potential shocks. In the particular case of research and innovation, including that generated through CGIAR's global network of research centers, GASP's financing is well positioned to support relevant players to address food and nutrition security on the one hand. On the other hand, it will strengthen the resilient recovery of agriculture and food systems, particularly while facing the additional risks brought by climate change and its increasing effects. I want to underline here that even in times of crisis, we think it's still possible to reach SDG 2 by 2030. A world without hunger remains possible. That is our motto. And effective and coordinated institutions like CGIAR and GASP can contribute enormously to reach that goal, even in times of crisis. Given the context of such crisis, the need to work together is more urgent than ever. CGIAR and GASP's cooperation is a fine and outstanding example for what is needed now and everywhere. Therefore, many thanks personally to everybody who is contributing. And thank you, dear colleagues, friends, and audience for your attention. I look forward to the panelists' view and getting even more useful insights. Thank you, Natasha, for the moderation, and thanks to all your team. Over.
Many thanks indeed, Dirk, for those remarks. And my thanks again to all of our 3 opening speakers who have commented from different vantage points, but I would say there's quite a lot of common threads in what you have touched upon. From the need to focus on smallholder farmers, the importance of partnerships by all involved in the food system, not just GASP and CGIAR, the criticality of the evidence-based approach informing both policy choices but investment choices on the ground. And also, with thanks to Dirk, recognizing the value of inclusive approaches and ensuring that we have all actors represented in decision-making around the table.
Natasha, hey,
yes,
if you don't mind, before you move to the panel, I just want to give a big shout out to the German government at this particular point in time, because having been involved in both the evolution of the GASP and the CGIAR, I have to say that at a time of crisis, when resources are scarce, Dirk, so please convey this also to your leadership, how much this is appreciated. The GASP wouldn't be where it is today without Germany stepping up. All of us who've been involved in these conversations know that. And in the contribution that your team makes at the CGIAR, the One CGIAR conversation is invaluable. We wouldn't be where we are today without that. So it's not only the funding, but it's also the personal commitment of the individuals involved at the BMZ. So I wanted to use this opportunity to give you a big shout out for that. We are intensely grateful in both cases to you. Sorry,
Thank you very
Natasha,
much.
that wasn't part of the program, but I just—
not at all.
Since we have Dirk here on the call, I wanted to make sure that happens.
Not at all, Jürgen. That's a very welcome intervention. And I think from the GASP side, we would wholeheartedly agree. We have really valued Germany's leadership, substantive engagement, and of course, financial support. Fantastic. At this point, colleagues, I'm very happy just ahead of our panel, which is the next full item on our agenda, to be able to invite my team behind the scenes to now show us a brief video. Hopefully this will help both summarize and visualize some of the efforts that we're going to focus on today with respect to CGIAR and GASP working in partnership on the ground. So Ken, hopefully we can put that up for the next couple of minutes, and then the panel will start after that. Thank you.
2021 is a crucial year to prevent famine and protect livelihoods and food security for billions of people. Agriculture is and will remain a critical sector for low-income countries as they continue to feel the brunt of climate change and the socio-economic decline caused by COVID-19. Long-term solutions to food insecurity require a coordinated, science-based approach, not only for COVID-19 recovery, but also to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. To this end, the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program and CGIAR have come together to contribute to food systems transformation through complementary goals and activities focused on smallholder farmers. To date, this collaboration has led to a variety of innovative solutions for the many challenges faced by smallholder farmers. With financing provided by GAFSP, farmers, agricultural civil society organizations, and national governments can co-define and co-develop locally led initiatives, scale out appropriate technologies, and provide user feedback to CGIAR about their existing research to make them truly demand-driven products. The GAFSP and CGIAR partnership model illustrates how acting locally and leveraging each other's strengths can deliver results and extend the value of invested resources. More work is left to be done. Together, we can initiate demand-driven programs to build back better and stronger food systems for all.
Many thanks indeed for showing that video. I think it was a nice encapsulation and way to visualize some of the efforts on the ground. And now I'm pleased to say that we have an opportunity to dig even deeper and to hear from those who are engaged in work at the country and regional level, to share their experiences, the challenges they've been facing, and some of the steps they've been taking in different ways and working in partnership with platforms like ours. Let me first introduce the panel. I hope you can see all of them on the screen now. We have with us today Mr. Mark Egan, Principal Agricultural Economist at the African Development Bank. I think among the many things that Mark does with ADB includes overseeing a GAFS-financed project in Liberia, the Smallholder Agricultural Productivity Enhancement and Commercialization Project, and we'll hear more about that amongst other things. We also have Miss Angie Howard. Angie is a farmer and cassava processor from the Gangama Hub, but critically, she's also the manager of the Falama Group in Liberia, drawing from her experience working with other smallholders on the ground. And we're thrilled to be able to hear about her experience too today. Mr. Dennis Wiagbi is with us representing the government of Liberia. He is the Director for Monitoring and Evaluation at the Ministry of Agriculture. And we look forward to his perspective on the role that research and innovation plays in accomplishing his ministry's goals. Dr. Ekaterina Krivonos is the Deputy Director for Programs and co-lead of the CGIAR COVID-19 Hub. We've already heard a little bit about her work from Kundavi, but with thanks to Katerina, we'll have an opportunity to explore in more depth and hear more details of how the Hub has been trying to respond and help countries and clients to respond to needs on the ground. And last but not least, we have Mr. Reggie Lee. Reggie is the Director of Programs at Grow Asia. And we really welcome his participation so that we also have insights from another region globally, and also from the perspective of a network of private sector actors, also, of course, active in this same space, and dealing with some of the similar challenges and issues on the ground. So my thanks to all of you who you're all connecting in different time zones, different technical challenges. So we really appreciate your efforts, and I hope that we'll be able, that the bandwidth will work with us to allow us to hear and see all of you clearly. To start with, what I would like to do is to pick up actually from the video and zero in on experience at the country level, focusing initially on Liberia, given that we have the benefit of 3 key local partners who I just introduced, each of you trying to address food security in different ways. I would like to ask each of you, what have been the most pressing concerns and challenges from your perspective in trying to implement sustainable agriculture and address food security locally? And how has the GAFS CGIAR partnership contributed in that regard? Ms. Howard, Angie, I would like to start with you, and we would really like to hear from you speaking to your experience as a producer on the ground, and also as someone trying to build local institutions that play a role in the value chain. So Angie, over to you. Thank you. Ken, can we ensure that Angie is unmuted? Is that possible? Please go ahead, Angie. Let's see if we can. Oh, I think you may be muted again. Oh, no. We seem to have lost Angie. I'm sure that my team behind the scenes will be doing their best to get Angie back with us. In the meantime, let me turn to Mark with the same question. From the perspective of a key multilateral partner trying to engage at the field level, what have the concerns been for you as a partner? And can you tell us a little bit about the experience with GAFS and CGIAR in that regard?
First, let me thank you, Natasha, for inviting the bank to be part of these discussions. Here in the bank, GAFS forms a huge portion of our agricultural portfolio. And so we are delighted to be part of this discussion. Now, back to your main question. What are the challenges that we face in the implementation of our project? I would want to focus or just restrict my responses with the case of Liberia, even though I work in other countries and the bank also works across the entire region. In the case of Liberia, I think one of the critical challenge had to do with funding. Liberia, coming from a post-conflict regime, requires an enormous resources to be able to fix the problems facing the agricultural sector. Currently, if we look at the public spending in Liberia, the government spends less than 1.5% of its national budget on this sector. So the sector is largely driven by donor support. And this is where GAFS comes in. Our traditional instrument, the ADF, African Development Fund, on its own is unable to provide sufficient resources to meet the required needs to provide the financial and technical assistance that the country requires. So in partnership with GAFS, through their various calls, we're able to get additional resources. In the case of SAPEC, we got about $45 million, whereby the ADF co-financed to implement the SAPEC project, which has largely been very successful according to the independent evaluation report. Over.
Thanks, Mark. That's good to hear. And of course, it's nice to hear that GAFS financing was able to play a critical role. I'm not sure if I think we do have Angie back. I will circle back to you, Mark, but while we have Angie on the line, Angie, would you be able to share with us your experience as I said, as a farmer, as a processor, as someone who's also been trying to build institutions to play a more active role in the value chain with respect to food and security nutrition?
Yes. First of all, I'm glad to be here. I appreciate this meeting. So what we at Falama, we are commercial farmers, and then we also process. Now, what has happened to us over the period of time, we are getting a lot of support from SAPEC through the AFDB. We're able to get a molding factory that we can process the cassava through there, process into several different things. We also got support from the AFDB through SAPEC. Through our farming processes, they were able to assist us with training, and then we also got improved cassava cuttings that we are going into commercial farming and removing a table cassava, which is a little more difficult to deal with. So we are moving in that direction. And then we also work with SAPEC. They train us, so we go around too and also train the farmers that we work with, because we want to extend our cassava farming, so we have cassava to support the factory all throughout the year. Over.
Thanks, Angie. Can you share a little bit about the role that some of the CGIAR partners locally have played, some of their agencies and the solutions on the ground? I think you referenced some varieties of cassava, new varieties of cassava that you were able to adopt. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, we're able to adapt new variety of cassava, which came from the partnership with SAPEC, RITA. So RITA were the one who gave us the cassava cuttings through SAPEC, and then they were also able to train us. But most of the support, according to RITA and SAPEC, came from the AFDB. So the bank has been very, very supportive and very involved in our work. They will even go out to see some of what we did in the farm and also at the factory. So we are planting now. We're trying to do about 300 acres of cassava, but we are moving into the industrial cassava, which is even better for us.
Fantastic. Many thanks, Angie. I'm going to turn back to Mark now, as you referenced the critical role that African Development Bank played. It sounds, Mark, that you were something of a broker in this regard, in trying to facilitate matching of these needs that Angie and fellow producers on the ground were facing in terms of strengthening the value chain and more, I think, nutritious and high value options, and then being able to connect them to partners that could support them. Would you like to speak to that a little bit?
Yes, thank you, Natasha and Angie. I think at the design of the project, our main focus was to strengthen the value chain by looking at how to increase productivity and also to add some value to the crops that will be produced, and then of course to the market. Now, productivity is largely research driven. And we learned from the experience of the Green Revolution, where farmers were given access to improved agricultural technologies. So in the case of SAPEC, the focus commodities were rice and cassava. And if we want international agencies or international research agencies that are well versed with cassava and rice issues, then of course ITA and Africa Rice will definitely be our natural partners. In the past, we also worked with the CGIA Center through Africa Rice and IITA through the SADES SC project, which is support to agricultural development and research for strategic crops So we had that experience with the CGI Center. And through that, we're able to have a discussion with the government that we think that bringing these research institutions on board would help us to double the productivity. And of course, the evaluation reports have validated this assumption that we had. We brought on board IITA and Africa Rice. So Africa Rice was focusing on the rice, whilst IITA was also focusing on cassava, right from production through processing to the market. Over.
Many thanks, Mark. You mentioned the role of government there. And so at this point, let me turn to Mr. Wiagbe, to Dennis from the Ministry of Agriculture. Would you be able to maybe pick up on Mark's remarks and share with us from the perspective of the Ministry of Agriculture, what for you has been the role that research and innovation have played in addressing your most pressing concerns with respect to agriculture on the ground in Liberia?
Thank you so much, Natasha, and greetings to all on this Zoom video. We are very grateful to form part of this program, and especially grateful to GAPS for the continued support of our food security programs and other initiatives. As the bank said, indeed, funding from this source has been very helpful in meeting our food security needs. As you know, the SAPEX project targeted two key value chains that are our staples, rice and cassava. We eat it so much, but we are not able to produce it. So how can we close that gap? As other speakers said, it's just research that's going to do that. And so in the formulation of the gap and looking at the objective that GAPS want to address in each country, we strategically focus on our staple food. So both IITA for cassava and Africa Rice for rice have been very instrumental in trying to meet our food needs. And indeed it did. It did, because as Angie Corrales said, the varieties of cassava and rice introduced have increased in yield. But that's whet our appetite, because we have seen this huge potential that research has shown to close the gap of the number of hungry people we have in this country to meet that need, even to export to other countries in need. And so there's no question as to the credibility or the potential these two research institutions bring to our country, because the evidence is there. One of the beneficiaries just spoke. But what is our challenge? If you speak to Angie critically, in fact, she may have alluded to that when she was speaking. She's a processor, she's a farmer. Why? She's being helped with funding, with proceeds from the GAPS project to have this improved factory. But she just cannot have the inputs for this factory. Of course, the research findings from IITA is available. Farmers around her and elsewhere are using them. But why is she not having this right input? Maybe as this conversation continues, we can elaborate more on how we see this kind of challenge could be addressed. But indeed, IITA and Africa Rice, the varieties that they have introduced to in our local communities are not just only productive, but have been able to be loved also to a certain extent by consumers, especially the new aromatic rice introduced by Africa Rice, the Narika L19, and even the table variety for cassava that Angie spoke about, plus the commercial varieties. So these are some gains that these two institutions have helped us to have available in our country, but need to be scaled up. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you so much, Dennis. Before I turn to Reggie in Singapore, I would like to quickly circle back to Angie, just to follow up on a point that Dennis made in terms of consumer demand. It's fantastic to hear about these new high yield varieties, more nutritious varieties. Did you face any problems in acceptance or interest from your fellow farmers or their families with respect to these newer products?
Yes, we did. Now, for the farmers, we had to do a lot of training, a lot of information sharing. So one particular cassava variety is the yellow cassava. That the yellow cassava has vitamin A and it also has carbohydrate. Now in Liberia, if they don't know anything about yellow cassava, so if you went to the farmer and say this is a yellow cassava, they are afraid, they don't want to eat. So we have to educate them because it's healthy for your eyesight and other things. So we had to do a lot of training, a lot of information sharing from community to community to let them know. Now, the good thing about the industrial cassava, especially the yellow cassava, which is being planted more right now, because I work in Bombing County. So we're trying to multiply the yellow cassava because the yellow cassava is good. We have also gone into producing cereal from the yellow cassava. So we're asking the farmers to please plant more, as we're also planting a lot for our own purpose and also for sale. So actually in the beginning, yes, there were a lot of issues that they did not know about the yellow cassava. And then because the only cassava they knew about was the table cassava that you put in the pot, it cook, and then you eat it or process it into fufu or something else. Now with the industrial cassava, when you cook it, you cook it for hours and it wouldn't cook. So that one, the good side to it is that if you plant that cassava, there will be no theft. You will harvest it and you get more yield from there.
Many thanks, Angie. It's excellent to hear the different experiences there in Liberia. I'd like to turn now to Reggie, who is, of course, working himself in another region in Asia, and also with a different set of stakeholders from the private sector. Reggie, I wonder if what you've heard from our colleagues in Liberia resonates for you in any way, whether you're seeing similar concerns amongst your partners and in the countries that you're engaging with?
Thank you, Natasha. So maybe let me offer 3 points. I think firstly, we talked about financing. I think a lot of things inevitably gets mentioned, especially when it comes to scaling up. So new financing instruments to meet the development challenge, crowding in new pools of investors and capital, de-risking and redistributing the risk and rewards to those most suited to bear it. I think that is an issue that we see as well in our region, and a role that GAFS-SP, I think, could play. An example in that aspect, I think, was how GAFS-SP with IFC and other lenders, helped Amru Rice in Cambodia construct a rice mill that increased their contract farmers in their supply chain to 15,000 farmers. The second thing I wanted to share, I think, is around this learning, because I also see that as another pathway to scale, because we as a multi-stakeholder platform, partners come to us to learn. And I think by replication, when partners go out and apply those tools and insights and best practices on their own, that's how we can kind of scale up and get that collective movement. And so in that respect, our interactions with IRRI, with CIAT and some of the CGIAR centers, in a way, as Jürgen mentioned at the beginning, translating those research, getting that translated on the ground, we do also see that. Yeah, and then just the last thing, I think, and this is kind of referring to your video about coordinated approaches. And I think that is something that GrowAsia also plays to very much, because we act as a secretariat in these multi-stakeholder partnerships, the brokering aspect that you talked to with Mark Egan. So it's facilitating the knowledge generation, bringing in the right partners with those comparative advantages, and sharing the resources to execute complex solutions. We definitely see the need for collaboration, especially during these COVID times.
Thanks, Reggie. And actually, your remarks are a perfect segue to our next panel member that I'd like to invite, Dr. Krivonos, Katerina. Reggie referenced, of course, the ongoing COVID pandemic and the additional challenges that has brought. It's another layer of complexity on top of the gaps that have already been spoken to in terms of financing or consumer willingness to shift practices or investigate new products. Could you share with us what are some of the significant changes that you've seen in your research during and now, if we can even say post COVID-19, and how the CG research community has tried to respond to that?
Thanks, Natasha. Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. And it was also really interesting hearing about the experience in Liberia, and also from Reginald and his work, which really resonates with what we're trying to do at CGIAR. As it was already mentioned by multiple speakers, this really unprecedented scale and extent and complexity of the crisis that really brings together health issues and social, economic, and food security issues together meant that we as CGIAR really had to step up and kind of build our capacities further, leveraging what we already have from the existing tools, data set, but also labs that were used simply for COVID testing, and building further an existing phone service to replicate them, and to really, in the first instance, to understand the impact of this crisis on livelihoods, and food security, and nutrition, and different stakeholders like producers and consumers. So our first line of response was really using the existing programs that CGIAR already had in place, many of which were already relevant to COVID-19 response, because they simply kept production and marketing and livelihoods running and functioning. So even more important in a crisis situation than before. And on the other hand, what we did was pivoting some of the existing programs. So adapting them slightly, building on these existing capacities and tools to then address additional COVID-19 questions, whether it's how COVID-19 affected gender roles, or to what extent different players in the market were affected, between smallholder producers to large scale and retail food chains that actually turned out to be winners in this situation. So the ongoing work of CGIAR was adapted, pivoted, was really agile in this response, thanks to these existing capacities and networks and partnerships. And on the other hand, we established a COVID-19 hub, which is really complementing this existing and ongoing work, but also bringing together in a more coordinated manner as we transition to one CGIAR, especially at country level, really bringing all the capacities together in an integrated way and making this offer to the countries of what we can help them with, depending on where they are in the pandemic, what their priorities are in agriculture and food security, how the situation is shifting, which is very volatile, as we see many, not just second and third wave, but really protracted crisis. So our response has also shifted intact with that. And the hub really provides evidence, innovations, and tools, both to policymakers and stakeholders. And what we're doing is we're looking at three different areas. So one is value chain fractures, really trying to understand where those fractures happened and how they can be repaired. The second one is One Health, because obviously this crisis really brought it into light, the need for bringing together all this work on health and nutrition, but not only, but also, of course, the zoonotic diseases. So animal, human, and environmental health, really working at this intersection to prevent further occurrence of diseases and their control. And then lastly, we're looking into resilience building. So in the long run, how can we strengthen food systems to be more sustainable, healthy, resilient? In addition to that, we're working in 5 countries and very specific country demanded work. So this combination of type of research that we're conducting in these countries really varies according to country needs. And there we really operate through country priorities and through networks with our partners, whether it's ministries or NGOs or producer organizations. It's really very, very context specific.
Thanks, Katerina. That's great to hear. And actually, your your description of the network and the sort of ready presence that you had to be able to learn from what you were seeing on the ground and then pivot and respond also resonates with our experience, right, in terms of our projects on the ground that were able to be sort of eyes and ears, and who we were also able to help to sort of to make adjustments more immediately. But it's also good to hear about that country-focused work as well. And in that regard, let me now turn back to Mr. Wiagbi to understand a little bit from him, from the government perspective, in terms of how COVID-19 has played out in Liberia, and from your vantage point, where you have seen the greatest challenges play out for the Ministry of Agriculture in terms of how the sector has been impacted.
Thank you. When COVID struck, the government immediately locked down. Imagine you are a farmer and you have crops.
Mr. Wiagbi, I apologize. I'm not sure if it's just me, but I am not able to hear Dennis anymore.
About a month or two ago.
You're back.
Where we visited the field, farmers told us they have to abandon their crops around 4-5 because if they got into the town by 6, security will arrest them, not take them to jail, but will beat them. So they will come from the farm earlier. That caused a lot of loss to the private sector, especially to the smallholder farmers. Rice were in the field, about to be ripe. Mark is on this meeting. They approved for an assessment to be done. It was that time last year. It was last year around June, July. So the private sector was really hit because agriculture being seasonal and crops were already in the field. They were locked down. In fact, to get the inputs, countries bordering apricots to us, they could not get inputs because they closed up. At the same time, they could not get inputs from the capital, Monrovia, either because of the bar rule or also because of the lockdown. So this really impacted our smallholder farmers, especially people like Angie, who depend on these smallholder farmers and their other colleagues, their own network, where they support each other. So yes, the COVID pandemic seriously impacted the activities of agriculture in Liberia. There was lots of crops and other investments.
Thank you, Dennis. Yes, I think that that experience is very much resonates with what we have heard from different country contexts in terms of those mobility constraints and how that has affected both input supply and market access. Angie, if you're still accessible, would you be able to share a little bit from your experience as well in terms of the constraints that you and your fellow farmers organization and producer members faced?
Yes, the major constraint we have is cultivation, all right, from the farming side. Now, what happens is that you want to plant cassava, and you want to do commercial farming, all right. You need to have machines to clear the farm. That is not easily available here, all right. So if you're going to use or maybe a D8 or something to clear your land, to clear maybe the 100 acres that might take like a week, that's going to be difficult to do because you may not have the kind of capital to be able to hire the D8. So you get now farmers, you get laborers to go and clear your farm, something that would take you 1 week, going to take you maybe 2 to 3 months to just clear. So that is the major issue we have, all right? In planting the cassava, I don't know about the rice people, but I know about the cassava, the cassava side, all right? So that's the major thing we have, cultivating, clearing our farms and stuff like that.
Thanks, Angie. Let me turn now to Mark from ADB. When you're hearing these comments from Dennis, from Angie, in terms of the constraints that they've seen on the ground, have you found that the existing partnership that you described, right, between the project, the CG partners in country, the accessibility of some of the research tools, has that been able to contribute meaningfully in the COVID-19 response on the ground?
Thank you, Natasha. At the onset of the COVID outbreak, at the bank, we launched a $10 billion COVID facilities to support our regional member countries. And within this 10 billion COVID support, we also developed a Feed Africa COVID response plan, which was basically to focus on the agricultural sector. So within this Feed Africa COVID response plan, we had two interventions, the immediate and then the medium term. The immediate interventions were actions that required immediate implementation. For instance, if you want to design a new project, you have to go through the project cycle, and that cannot happen instantly. So that would be a medium-term action. With the immediate actions that required restructuring some of our existing projects to meet the need of the countries. As Dennis mentioned, there were a lot of lockdowns. The input supply systems were breaking down. Now, when you have an input supply system broken down, how then do you move into to help? So in the case of Liberia, through the partnership with Africa Rice, we had multiplied some foundation seeds into certified seeds that were to be released through the various seed channels. But when COVID came, we had to have a discussion with the project team that, look, we already had a plan to distribute this seed. However, there's an emergency. We need to identify vulnerable farmers that would be given these certified seeds for them to mitigate the impact of COVID on those vulnerable farmers, and by extension, their families. So in that sense, the partnership with Africa Rice helped the country to be ready in supporting the vulnerable farmers by releasing these certified seeds that had been produced in the previous farming cycle. Over.
Many thanks, Mark. Let me turn now back to Asia and to Reggie. And really just a reflection, you mentioned, I mean, you work for a partnership network. In general, how do you think that these partnerships and collaborations can be strengthened to more sustainably transform the food systems challenges that we've been hearing about today from our other panelists?
Thank you, Natasha. I think, firstly, we know that SDG 17, I think we kind of hear that a lot, underscores how partnership at all levels are central to the implementation of the SDGs. And I think Grow Asia's experience shows the value of such a coordinating mechanism or secretariat. I mentioned earlier about the role of facilitating, the role of brokering, the role of driving collective action. And at the same time, though, to the observation made earlier, how there are so many of these partnerships, but many also struggle with sustainable funding. especially when many of the value add and services that GrowAsia performs, for example, are public goods in nature. And so when we speak with potential funders, they prefer to invest in specific work streams because it's much easier to attribute their impacts of their investment. So I think one area that would really benefit a lot certainly is these funders to support the platforms, the glue that holds everything together and makes the whole the greater than the sum of the parts.
Thanks, Reggie. I think probably your remarks ring true for a number of us in this space. Many thanks to the panel. I would now like to try and turn to some of the questions that have been coming in from the chat to try and make sure that we take those on. Bear with me as I try and sift through and see how those can be directed. Perhaps let me start with Katerina. I think there's been a couple of questions for you. One of those here is, how does funding for agriculture support health interventions as part of the more holistic One Health approach? Would you be able to speak to that, Katerina?
Yes, sure, Natasha. Thank you for that question. And of course, when we look at this crisis that is really driven by this intercept between human health and animal health, all focuses on One Health approach, because it seems like a daunting task to really work on all these three spheres: human health, animal health, and environment. But if we really look at the root cause of this pandemic, it's clear that what we're looking at is specific ways in which we can address the link of how disease spills over from animals to humans and then affects all aspects of our life. So this is very specific things that our experts at ILRI, but also across CGR system are working on, really improve de-risking food systems to reduce the spillover of infectious diseases. But if we go beyond the zoonosis and really look at the health risks that food systems generate and what we can do about it, it's clear that investment in agriculture and agricultural research, in agricultural development in general, can tackle a multitude of health issues. So here we're also talking about antimicrobial resistance, we're talking about food safety. These are two issues where really front and central in CGR research program and in the future research program that we're currently developing. And going even broader, of course, support to healthier systems. And Jürgen in his opening remarks made it very clear the burden that food systems that are not operating in a healthy way generate. It is obvious that by investing in a healthy, sustainable, resilient agriculture, we can also improve nutrition, and nutrition will have very long-term effects on everyone's health, and the burden on the health system that non-communicable diseases are currently placing, that can be avoided. And just in general, having better nutrition through better agriculture will contribute to long-term well-being of societies and households and individuals.
Absolutely. Thanks, Katerina. And I think that the pandemic has really underscored the need for this cross-cutting food systems lens to be applied that tries to recognize, those interrelated features and how they can both contribute to a more vicious or ideally what we want is a more virtual cycle. I'm going to ask you one more follow-up question before I turn to one of our other panelists. I see that there's a question for you. How does the COVID-19 Hub disseminate information to countries and farmers on the evidence that it gathers?
So from the onset, we chose to work through country responses, so really working through partnerships and ongoing networks and relationships that our CGI centers have, starting first with Bangladesh and Ethiopia, but also expanding then to Myanmar, Malawi, and Nigeria. And that, in developing this work program that we have within the COVID-19 Hub, it was crucial to have an initial dialogue with the key stakeholders, and that also becomes our main channel of dissemination. So, for example, to foster dialogue in Ethiopia, we have our researchers are already working very closely and embedded in a number of crucial networks and task forces. For example, the Policy and Governance Task Force, which contributes to agriculture-related policies, and also National Information Platform Forum for Nutrition at the Ethiopian Public Health Institute. So these are long-term relationships that help us provide this agile response, but also ensure that our research response is really contributing to policy decisions and actions of actors, of food systems actors, through the different channels that may exist, whether it's information, whether it's public support, social development programs, health programs. This is where we have a chance to influence, but we have to be working with them from the onset, of course, and not just feeding them information when we complete the research.
Absolutely. No, it's good to hear about the role of that dialogue. And actually, in the context of GAFSP's current call for proposals, I'd really like to also underline that we look to country governments and PO partners that are interested in applying to be very consultative as they develop their proposals. And on the basis of this conversation and what we're learning, we would really encourage that research centers, research partners are part of that reflection and planning conversation to be able to draw from and benefit from the tools and solutions that are out there. Let me turn now to Dennis. Oh, have we lost Mr. Wiapi? Oh no, I see Dennis, you're there. There are one or two questions for you. One of those, first of all, is, has Liberia introduced any insurance system to small farms? Would you be able to quickly address that?
Yes. That is very interesting because in some of our meetings, once in a while, I'm opportune to attend senior level meetings. And this insurance program has come around the table. The simple answer to that question is no. Liberia does not. But it has come in a cycle, especially since COVID, to see how we can work with some of our financial partners. In fact, as you know, one of the greatest challenges in the agriculture sector is access to finance. So when one invests their meager resources in the agriculture and there's an adverse effect and they lose it all, that's strongly problematic. So how can we reduce the risk of farmers, gaining their investment, or to encourage more and more private sector players to go into agriculture to invest? Because for the past, in recent years, the government have been encouraging agriculture as a business, but then there needs to be some security because the sector is very prone to diseases and other natural effects. No, currently there is not such, but the discussion has started around the table. We hope that solution can come soon.
Many thanks, Dennis. And I think you put your finger on a critical aspect of the farming world in terms of risk and what available instruments there are to try and better manage that risk, be it insurance or more resilient seed varieties or institutional tools. Absolutely. Thank you for the good question and your response. Mark, I have a question here for you, which is, what can agencies do to meet the need for small-scale mechanization across Africa to support farmers? We already heard Angie speaking to the challenge that she faced when she was not able to access and use some of the machinery that had proved valuable to her in clearing land. Are you or ADB engaging in this area?
Yes, thank you, Natasha. I think mechanization is very critical if we want to transform the sector. We can't rely on the catalysts and hosts. So in our project in Liberia, the SAPEC, through our partnership with Africa Rice, especially, we introduced some mechanized equipment in the value chain. For instance, some threshers were introduced in Liberia. We also introduced some motorized equipment for the farmers. Now, within the bank's operations, we also try as much as possible to invest in mechanized land preparation within our project. Fortunately, in the new approved GAPS project for Liberia, the follow-up to the SAPEC. Mechanization is one of the focus of the project. So yes, the bank places or the bank prioritizes mechanization in our effort to transform the sector on the continent. Over.
Thank you, Mark. I have a question for Angie. If you're, I see that you're still with us. Angie, the question coming in for you was, how did you start participating in the SAPEC project and working with the CGIAR centers in Liberia at the beginning? Can you speak a little bit to how your journey with the project started?
Yes, actually, the SAPEC project started, and then they did they brought in some experts from Nigeria, also from, I think from the AFDB. There was a group from the AFDB, and then they went from RITA. So they did a scoping mission, all right? In Liberia, they wanted to know who were actually doing what with cassava at the time. And fortunately for me, I have my outlet and I have my product in different places. So all of my products are cassava products. So they kept on seeing these products in different places, and they called me, they contacted me. So that's how I got involved with them. So they did some visitation. They wanted to know what were actually involved into the cassava thing. I think for them, they didn't want to create a white elephant that you give the factory or give something to someone who is not actually or entrepreneur, all right, or actual farmer. So they did a scoping mission throughout the country. They visited the 15 counties, and then they were able to pick, entrepreneurs that were actually involved into the different things. That's how I got involved with SAPEC. All right. And so when they visited me in my small kitchen where I was processing and everything, they saw me doing it, they saw the product there. So they thought that I would have been a good person, or this business would have been a better one to be able to benefit from the SAPEC project. So that's how I got involved with them, and they were able to build the factory and put in the machines and everything like that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Angie, for sharing that experience and how you were already engaging in entrepreneurial activities and thinking about how your cassava could be processed and reach markets. And then that's now been boosted by the engagement with the project and the research partners. I'm going to give one brief final question that was addressed to Reggie before we draw our session to a close. Reggie, there's a question here. Can you please give some more examples of how Grow Asia coordinated with stakeholders to operationalize interventions on the ground? And what were the roles of each partner? That's quite a big question, but the best that you can do in a minute would be fantastic.
No problem. I'll give an example in Vietnam, where we partnered with Bayer Crop Science and the Vietnam National Agency for Extension Services. And so this had the two objectives of really being a COVID-19 response. So Bayer provided a lot of the crop protection products, some of the agronomy training, and we used those materials with those extension officers to reach 80,000 farmers in the Mekong Delta region.
Fantastic. Thanks, Reggie, for that capsule example. It is my turn now to give a sincere thanks to all of you as panelists. Reggie in Singapore, Dennis and Angie in Liberia, Mark, I believe you're in Abidjan, if I'm not mistaken, and Katerina, forgive me, I'm not sure where you're speaking to us from. Are you in Europe?
I'm in Rome.
In Rome, excellent. Well, we appreciate the efforts that you've made in connecting and sharing your really valuable experience. I think we've heard some live examples of the challenges that you were facing on the ground even before the pandemic hit, and the role that the combination of the financing from GAFS, the brokering and technical support from an organization like African Development Bank, and the innovations provided through the CG centers has brought to the Liberia experience. And we've also heard from Katerina on the really valuable way in which CGIAR have leveraged their network of research organizations and been able to pivot and kind of consolidate the experience and tailor it now to be able to support countries to respond to COVID-19. And Reggie, the experience in Asia with respect to how a platform provides a critical network for learning and coordination. And again, as you had referenced, that brokering role, which I think when we're putting our heads together on these really complex solutions is essential at this time. Let me turn now to our colleague, Lisa Albrechtsen, who is joining us from the government of Norway. Both CGIAR and GAFSP are very privileged to have the support of Norway in our efforts. Lisa is the Special Representative on Climate Adaptation and Food Security, and I would love to invite her to make some closing remarks before I wrap up. Thank you so much, Lisa. Over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Natasha, and thank you for inviting me to make a few remarks at the end of this very rich discussion. Investment in research and innovation is key to increasing sustainable food production, improving nutrition, and achieving SDG2. It is essential that science is implemented and that policies are science-based. Norway promotes digitalization and the use of new and adapted technologies among small-scale producers and other actors in the food systems. But the challenge is how to make sure that these new technologies and innovations not only reach small-scale farmers, but also respond to their priorities and their needs. The event today has provided a glimpse of how this can happen. With flexible funds that respond to countries' needs and a science-based approach to promote sustainable agriculture, we are able to support productivity and fight food insecurity. I have enjoyed listening to the partnership between GAFSP and CGIAR as how they have worked in Liberia. Coupled with collaborations with the government and the African Development Bank, the project has created employment, secured livelihoods, and increased food security and nutrition. I take note that partnership, as mentioned by several speakers today, is the key for the success of this project. Such partnerships also include direct involvement of smallholder farmers. This collaborative model is what sets CGIAR and GAFSP apart, and is also why Norway has partnered with both initiatives. While they are multilateral in nature, both start at country level, helping to incentivize dialogue between research centers, national governments, development institutions, private sector, and farmer organizations, which ultimately bring forward solutions that have been tailored and designed by the community. In the current context of scarce financing and high needs, this example of partnership demonstrates that flexible financing coupled with local initiatives and research can deliver results and extend the value of invested resources. Norway has been a long-standing partner of the CGIAR, and we have given high priority to this institution in our development cooperation for food security. With the launch of Norway's Action Plan on Sustainable Food Systems 2 years ago, we have taken an integrated approach to promote food security. As such, we also decided to partner with GAFSP because this initiative complements other programs that we support. And more importantly, it contributes to strengthen the effects of science when fighting food insecurity. Today's event is a case in point. Norway is pleased to be a continued partner of both the CGIAR and GAFSP, and we look forward to see that further opportunities for collaboration and partnerships are seized, including in the GAFSP call for proposals. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lise, for taking the time to join us and for representing Norway, which, as you clearly outlined, is a critical partner to both of our partnerships. It's fantastic to have that commitment reconfirmed here. It falls to me now, I think we have just 1 minute left, and it's been my real pleasure, as I mentioned at the outset, to moderate this session with all of you today. I'd like to offer my sincere thanks to all of the speakers, from those that opened the session, Jürgen Vögele and Kundavi and Dirk, to those of you who have been on the panel with us just now, Katerina and Reggie, Angie, Dennis, and Mark, and of course to Lise in wrapping up. I'd also like to offer my thanks to everybody behind the scenes who has been working very hard to help plan and deliver this session, including our technical support. I think we've all had to learn to do things differently in the last 15 months. And perhaps one of the upsides is that we now are a little bit more adept in using this technology to connect wherever we're located. I'd also like to thank our French language interpreters who have done a fantastic job, I think, of keeping up with our rich conversation and enabling a broader set of audience participants. As Lise mentioned, this session for us, for GAFSP, is very timely, given that we have our call for proposals ongoing. And we would really like to underscore and encourage collaboration as any of you who are listening are considering or finalizing applications which are due in September. As Lisa said, one of our goals is to help use our financing to put research solutions into practice, to allow the innovations that are being developed, like organizations like CGIAR, to be able to support governments and farmers in more resilient and sustainable practices on the ground. I noticed in the launch of the SOFI report yesterday that they used the term to build forward better. And I think this session is really speaking to that goal. And I have no doubt that as we go forward, as we really try and emphasize partnerships like ours, where we have a combination of inclusive institutions, facilitating access to data and innovation that really helps to accelerate policy and investment gains on the ground, that we will all make our best efforts to build forward better in this challenging time. So with that, let me close the session, again with sincere thanks. Please do get in touch if you're interested in GAFSP's call for proposals. Visit our website and do reach out. If you're interested in the work of the CGIAR COVID-19 Hub, please also do visit their website and reach out to them. But with that, let me close with sincere thanks again. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Reggie.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure. Bye.
Thanks, Katerina.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dennis. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.